Welcome back. We're doing segment and turning again. I'm doing another vessel, but the vessel's not the key part. I want to show you a new fixture that's very simple to make, very easy to use. This thing will make open segment assembly on the lathe much simpler. So let me show you how the fixture works, and then let's go ahead from there and I'll show you how to make one. So what I have here is an indexing plate. My project here, I'm starting on the second level, and this is the fixture. It's fastening into the tailstock of the lathe. It's rested on the tool rest. It is dead square, and I know that because I used a level here to make sure this is dead level. I have a piece of metal that extends right to the center of rotation, so I can measure this distance from here to my stop to get the exact dimensions I need. When you go on to Woodturner Pro or Segment Pro, you get a cut list that looks like this, which is fine, it works. However, I wanted something easier to work with, so I've got bigger display. I also am going to put two different color segments together, and I wanted to be sure that I didn't forget that this is a light one, this is a dark one. And so I made up a spreadsheet that contains exactly the same information, but in a more readable format for me. So this is what I'm working with. I'm on ring number 2, ring number 3. It has to be 2.39 from the center. I measured that out with a set of calipers to set this stop at the right place. And I'm ready to go ahead and screw on another segment. So I'm going to advance to my next location, which is right there. It's going to be a light segment because I looked ahead. Now, every time you cut these, you need to be sure to deburr every face of them. And I'm using a 180 grit piece of sandpaper here just to be sure that side is nice and flat. A little bit of glue. I've advanced to the next location. And I have a very special accessory here. It's used for other things too occasionally. And that piece is glued in place. Now I'm using Tide Bond's new speed set glue. And the purpose of this, it sets much more rapidly than the original Tide Bond. But this tends to take a little bit longer to harden up enough that I can actually work on that level. So I've been using this new glue, and it seems to be working pretty well. It dries nice and clear, so I think it's going to be just great. So while the glue is setting on that one, I'll go on here and pick out my next piece, which needs to be a dark one. If I just don't pre-sand these, and I work each piece right before I mount it, make sure that face is nice and flat. This little piece of 180 grit sandpaper, and a touch of glue. Don't need that sitting there. Go to my next location, and I've felt marked on my little disc so I don't forget where I need to go. And while this is drying in place, let me show you how to build it. Now that you've seen how to use this, let me show you how I made it. It's pretty simple. Need very little material. I have a piece of wood. Width is not important. Length is not important. But thickness is. I want to be sure this is exactly 3/4 of an inch. I then made a block of wood, which is 1.5 inches. So when these two are glued together, these two will join right at the center line. So a block of wood, 1.5 inches square. Length is really not too important, but it does matter when I put this bolt in. I would like to have a bolt that projects maybe 2 inches. So a bolt, washer and nut. And because I'm going to drill a hole through here, I'm going to need some tools. I need a drill bit, That's exactly the right size for that. I'm going to glue these together eventually, so I'm going to need some glue. And I need a piece of aluminum angle. This is a 1/16 inch thickness by 1 inch dimension. Now when I fasten this to this, I want this to sit square and flat. And it's a little too tall, so I'm going to have to trim one edge back and then smooth it up with a file. Actually, I can do all this trimming on the bandsaw just fine, but I do need a piece of backing material behind it so that I don't tear and rip this out. So, a piece of wood, a block of wood, a piece of angle iron, and a bolt, kind of my set. Tools wise, a drill hole for the bolt. I'm going to have to do some measuring, so I have a set of calipers here for that. I'm going to need my wood glue to put the pieces together eventually. And I bought a box of, these are sheet metal screws. They'll be just fine. They're long enough for what I need. These are number 8s by 5/8. Any wood screw or sheet metal screw will do. I'm going to have to drill and mark holes in this piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is fix this piece right here. I'm going to trim this to exactly 3/4 so this will fit here. Now if you have wood that's thicker than the standard 3/4, it's really 13/16. Then if you just make your block of wood instead of 1.5 inches, 1 5/8, then the two still will line up at center lines. So I cut this wood to match. So let's start making the pieces. I'm going to start initially by trimming this and marking it for the drill holes. So let's go to the bandsaw. I know this piece can also be cut on a table saw, but it's been my effect that working on the bandsaw is just fine. It's a thin piece of aluminum, cuts nicely, doesn't dull my blade. I am using a piece of backing material which is cut to just barely clear the blade. This reduces the amount of tear out and poor pieces of aluminum that might be projected below the cut. So I use this every time I'm working with the thin aluminum. Now clean up the edge because it will be rough and can easily cut or tear. I'm just using a file, square that edge off. Once the edge is fairly squared off, I'll turn it on its side and look at any curl that might have been off of the edge. And that prepares the piece just fine. Table saw is also fine to do this with. So now what I got to do is to mark it. I've identified about the center of that small edge. I recognize that 3/4 inch needs to be projected past the end of the board so that it'll line up with 0 spot on the lathe. So I've center punched a number of locations for drilling, and that helps the drill to find its location. And I'm again using a backer board to prevent any unnecessary tear outs on the back side. If you drill holes slightly larger than what is necessary, it'll allow you a certain amount of freedom in adjustment when you get ready to screw the components together. So I've marked 5 locations, drilled 5 holes, and after the holes have been drilled, I've gone in and cleaned up those areas, again with sandpaper or a deburring tool of some sort, in order just to have nice smooth surfaces. I pre-drilled on the wood too. I lined up the piece. I pre-drilled holes. I'm using some number 8 sheet metal screws, and this will allow those screws to go in much more easily. And if the holes are slightly over-drilled in the aluminum, you can make some adjustments so that the top edge of the aluminum lines up with the flat surface of the wood. So those are screwed in, and the assembly of the board then is pretty much complete. The last thing to do is to make the block that's going to be mounted into the tailstock via the Jacob's chuck. This is the 3/4 square piece of wood. I'm just drilling an appropriate hole all the way through it. This will allow the bolt assembly to clear all the way through. Be sure you're absolutely dead center on the wood that you're drilling. So I now have to simply insert that bolt before I glue them together. Please remember to put the bolt in first, because once it's glued onto the board, the aluminum will block the ability, the aluminum strip will block the ability of you to get that bolt into the hole. So I put the bolt in, a little bit of a glue on the edge, and then it's clamped to a piece of end grain wood. So plenty of glue in there is a good idea. Once it's clamped and the glue is dried, it can always be cleaned off. And that's it. You can see what I mean about the bolt and the clearance now. The aluminum piece, which goes right to the center of the lathe, which is also the center of the bowl, needs to be pre-inserted. That's it. It's all done. There's your assembly ready to go onto the lathe. And all you need is a stop block of some sort. I made one that'll clamp onto the piece of aluminum, and we're done. So I wanted to show you how to build the fixture. It's not that complicated. Be sure that whatever the thickness of the stock that you're using, it's doubled in the square that fastens onto the end so that everything is mid-center. Remember the old days, we used to use a fixture like this, very specific for the lathe. Works fine, but a lot more complicated to build. So the new ones don't require that much extra effort. I've actually made one for myself out of metal, just for the fun of doing something even different. One thing you might do over the original is replace this Jacob's chuck with a Morris taper attached to the end here, and then you eliminate any other additional accessories. Where did this all come from? Another YouTuber designed this and put it up on his website. And from there, he's shared it with everybody and allows us all to copy it. His address, if you want to go to the original videos, is down here in the comments. Chefware Kits has also decided to offer that as a product exactly like he had designed it himself. So a terrific contribution among us segmented turners for each other's benefit. And I appreciate that. Well, you see, I'm not at the lathe where we made the last ring, and I'm also not on the same project. But I want to illustrate a couple of other simple points that this fixture will do that you can't do otherwise. Well, this is an 18-inch lathe. My project was turned on a 20. This one was turned on a 16, so nothing aligns. So I've inserted the fixture, and here's how to get it in perfect alignment. I'm going to simply crank in the tailstock until the platform clears that segment. And on a close-up shot, you can tell that that segment does not perfectly line up. Here's how to make that adjustment. I'm simply going to go down to my tool rest. I'm going to loosen it. I'm going to raise it up until the bottom of that previously installed segment lines up perfectly with the platform. And now I'm lined up on this lathe. Is the platform level? Not necessarily. In this case, it's not. But everything is perfectly lined up. Now, Rick Nelson, our instructor for segmented turning here at Mount Diablo Adult Ed, has developed a technique using this fixture for installing the next ring perfectly without measuring. So, Rick, come on over here. Let me introduce Rick. He's been with us for a number of years and is in charge of our segmented program here at Mount Diablo Adult Ed. And he's going to show you the non-math way.
Okay.
Go for it.
I'm flattered by your introduction. You wrote the book. Okay, so now that we're lined up with this ring, the trick is to come back in within 1/4 of an inch or so of the ring that's already been placed. And we'll take this segment now for the next ring and just slide it along the jig until the top edges align. And
Can you take your hand away and show us what that looks like?
There we go.
Oh, I see it. The top edges are parallel with each other, but the outside edges are different.
So then you set the stop, the placement stop on the jig, and without measuring at all, why this new ring that we're going to glue on is precisely aligned with the rings below. Please, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. This is a technique I think that's going to be really helpful to all of you who are trying to find easier, simpler ways to do open segment. We're always trying to provide education and information to all of you woodturners, and to the extent that we're providing you, thank you very much. We appreciate your subscriptions and your thumbs ups. Is there something we haven't covered? Please send us an email, text us, whatever. But we really want to continue to provide videos that help you become a more efficient turner and having more fun doing it. So thanks for watching. We appreciate your following. Take care.